Thank you for watching A Lasting Faith Does Curriculum Matter online event. My name is Melanie Hester, and I am the Community Engagement Manager at Awana, and you're about to watch a conversation that happened between myself, Jenny Smith, who is also at Awana. She is a part of our Bright Curriculum team, and Sam Luce, who is a pastor of families at Redeemer Church in New York. We came together to discuss what does it look like for us to help take curriculum that we want so badly to impress upon the children in our churches and help them know, love, and serve Jesus and make the right decision. How do we know the right one is right for my church? And what does it look like for us to make sure that what's in the curriculum is biblical and important and passing on a love for Jesus into the lives of the kids that come each week? And so you'll see that you jump right into that conversation with Sam due to a technical difficulty that just didn't allow us to catch the very first couple of minutes of conversation. But trust me, it was just introductions. You didn't miss much. And what you're about to hear is going to help you make that process of what do I do with curriculum and how can it help the children in my church know Jesus for the rest of their lives. So check it out.
I think it's always on our mind too, Sam, because Sunday's always coming, right? Like
Yeah, totally.
curriculum, we're always interacting with it. And every week we're touching it and thinking, is this the best thing? I'm frustrated with this, this, and this. There's got to be something out there that's frustration free, right? And so
Yeah.
I think since Sunday's always coming and curriculum is always coming and the next lesson's always coming, I think that's a big reason it's always on our mind too. But I agree with you, right? Like we're always looking at what else is out there.
Well, and I think too, Jenny, I think what we try to always think is we always think like that there's like we're looking for a silver bullet curriculum, because when we go through it, there's no curriculum is perfect, and no curriculum is perfect for the exact needs of our congregation. And so when you have a lesson one week that's a little bit tough and you're like, man, maybe I should find something else. And I think that's the reality for every curriculum we've ever used, is that it's not exactly what we're looking for, because it's not made for your church, it's made for the church.
Right.
So
I think it's important to talk through and think through why it matters though, right?
Yeah,
like it's always
totally.
coming, it's always on our mind. We're always looking for the next best thing. So let's talk for a few minutes about why it even matters, why curriculum is such a big deal to what we do. We spend a lot of time focusing on a lot of other things too, right? Like decorations and events suck up so much of our time, and check-in systems, right? And that work or don't work on a given Sunday. All of those things take up so much of our time and budget and energy that sometimes curriculum becomes that thing I know has to get done before Sunday. But it matters so much more than that, right? Like
Totally.
curriculum is guiding what we're teaching. It's guiding how we're teaching. It's really determining how we're discipling kids and if we're discipling kids. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a huge thing. And I think sometimes what we do is we outsource the theological this hugely theological aspect of our church. And we say, well, because it is so time consuming, I'm just going to have someone else has already done the work. I'll do that so I can do the pastoring of kids. And it's a huge part of pastoring. Like the curriculum that you choose is a massive part of the formation of kids into the image of Christ. And so we can't just say, I got to find this so that way I free up all this chunk of time so I can spend time with kids, make our events better, do the other things of pastoring. The curriculum that you choose, whether you write it, whether you buy it, whatever it is, it's a huge responsibility. I would say it's one of the greatest responsibilities you have as a kids pastor, to make sure you get that part right. Whether you're writing it yourself or you're buying it from someone else, you have to say which one is best suited to form our kids into the image of Christ.
I love what you called out a minute ago there, that sometimes we want to check this box and have the easiest curriculum, have something plug and play so that we can get on to the other things. That's a little bit convicting. After I did 20 years of kids ministry, right? Like that's a little convicting. I think there have been times that I did that. How do I make this easy so we can all do the other things?
Yeah, and it's sure. And I think one of the largest questions I get when I talk to kids pastors is, how easy is it for me to use, and how easy is it for our volunteers to use? And I think that's a consideration, but it can't be the primary one. Because ease of use is helpful, but it is not the goal. It is not. We don't want just because if the things it's saying aren't true and aren't good and aren't right about who God is, it doesn't matter how easy it is. because what we want is we take this seriously. We are, as people who teach, what the Bible tells us, that teachers are held to a higher account. And that's you, that's me, that's us as the church. We are held accountable for the diet that we give our kids, and who our kids become. We are held accountable for that. And that's a huge, huge responsibility. So ease of use is a factor, but it can't be the factor.
Right. I would agree with that. We were talking earlier and we had a great conversation about taking in consideration what we want our end goals to be.
Yeah.
Like when we're focused on curriculum, taking care of this Sunday, right? Making it easy so we can get through this Sunday, we kind of lose sight of that. Will you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, no, totally. I think where the curriculum discussion goes sideways, I think it oftentimes is we're looking for like this pragmatic solution to a problem that we have. We're looking for this, like I need curriculum. I don't have the time to write it. I'm working part-time, or I'm at a small church. I'm working part-time. I'm doing this only part-time. I don't have time to write it. Or I'm in a larger church. I'm running a staff. I'm working with all these events. I don't have time to write it. So what we do is we try to find a pragmatic solution without having the conversation, which I think we need to have around curriculum, is what is the philosophical underpinnings? What is the theological vision that this curriculum has? Like where is it start? Where is the starting point? And then what is it driving towards? What is the ontological end? What is the end goal of this curriculum? What is it producing? And because if you don't understand the foundation and you don't understand the goal, what's going to happen is it's going to I guess what I try to say is those are the two most important things when in looking at a curriculum, is to say does this curriculum match the theological foundations of our church and the way that we're going, and is it biblical? And then ultimately at the end, what kind of a follower of Christ, what kind of a disciple is it producing? And I think those are massive. Those questions need to be considered more than production value, more than does it have a video, more than how does it have a take-home piece that's engaging, more than does it have tweets and emails connected to it, which those are all helpful, but those are just, it's like buying a car. Like that's the interior, does it have leather seats and electric windows? But if your car doesn't have an engine, right, the electric windows don't matter. Your leather seats are impressive, but you're not, everyone's gonna have to come see your car. You can't go show them your car. So right. I think sometimes when we forget about the theological framework of it and the goal of it, where are we driving towards? How are we going to get there? It doesn't matter, whether your seats, those are nice to have, but those aren't core and essential. And I think in the kids ministry conversations I've been a part of or seen online, I think that's a huge part of it. And I think those are necessary, but not primary and not eternal, ultimately.
Yeah, I think what's important of what you said there, Sam, is that they're necessary, which means that like we need to have them, because as at Awana, we've developed this philosophy that we call the 3 V's, and it talks about that first, when a child, in order for them to have a lasting faith of what it looks like to follow Jesus for the rest of their lives, like they need to know that within your church they belong. And that's where that set of things sit in, of well, how do they feel they walk in, how are they comfortable? Right. But if we ever do is sit in that, then we totally miss out on the transformation space of what the gospel does in their life. Right. And I think that's where we sit in the curriculum lens of realizing that curriculum needs to have the heavy weight that it has, because it's helping us as a tool to make disciples, right? Like, and so that's why it feels so intense. That's why this feels like such an important decision, because I'm going to be real frank with you and say it is. Like, it is an important decision. And so Sam, as for both you and Jenny, I'd love to hear more about, like, y'all have been leading in your churches for a significant amount of time. So I'm sure you've sat in this chair of wondering, what does this look like? And you gave a really great framework, Sam, of making sure that it fits within the goals theologically of what your church is trying to accomplish. So could you guys go really practical with me, again, both of you, to help us know, like, what does that practically look like in the church for a leader who's saying, what does that mean? Like, dig into that for us.
I guess I would say one super practical thing is that, like I was saying earlier, is that there's no perfect curriculum for the context for the kids that you are serving. So you will have to change something. And most curriculums will come with like an editable version that you can use to change. So what you have to ask yourself is what am I willing to change, and how much of it am I willing to change to make it fit our church theologically and just practically. Like there's some suggestions. I remember one curriculum, it was like, it's like the 2-year-olds, it was like, how it's talking about something about the uniqueness of God and how God made them, which is super great for 2-year-olds to hear and preschool kids to understand. But they had like, it was like this, they said, get out a ink pad and put the kids' fingers in the ink and then put it on paper. And again, so because we had the freedom, that probably sounded good somewhere, but when you have a room of like 10, 15 2-year-olds, like ink pads and 2-year-olds are not friends. And so so that was just, and so what we do is was all the curriculum bad? No, there was some great other suggestions, and so we just went with another one. And so what you have to do, but we had to go through it and say, okay, we're gonna have to change that for our church. That might work for a church if there's like maybe a couple kids, maybe 1 or 2 kids, that might be super cute for the parents. But when you have lots and lots of kids, that's not really doable. And so that's what you have to ask is what am I willing to change, and why am I having to change, and what am I going to have to change? I think answering those questions will determine whether that curriculum is a good fit for your church or not.
And I think leaders, we all have to take the time to pause and not just compare curriculums to each other, but like Sam was saying, is take that time to really establish who are we, who is our what is our church like, what do we want to accomplish, like Sam said earlier, what's the end result going to be, and establish that first. And then as you're looking at the different curriculum choices, you've got to have that established first, or you're going to be all over the place. And Sam, you were super generous to share your ebook with our viewers, so I'm sure they're all digging into that. But in that, you had several filters to look at as you're looking through curriculum. That's super practical too. Will you share those?
Yeah, totally. And so, I mean, the main reason I wrote this like ebook, it's like a short ebook I did like almost 10 years ago now, was basically to answer this question, because it was a question that it's a perennial question on any, if you're involved in any kids ministry online thing, there's a question is, help me, I need a new curriculum, or what curriculum works for you. And then everybody so helpfully puts in every curriculum out there, which is great. But again, it doesn't help that person that's asking that question, because a Google search will give you every curriculum out there. So my goal was to say is like, how can we help the person that's saying what curriculum is best for me? And there's so many great options. There's great options out there. And so what I did was I came up with a few filters that we use. This is how we decide what curriculum works best for us. And one thing I would just suggest before I go through those is just find a curriculum and stick with it. Like the point of a scope and sequence is to get through the scope and sequence. Don't change every year. Like if you want to change, I would say get through the scope and sequence. Give it a couple of years, unless it's something serious and you got to do it, then do that. But give it a chance to do its work. So the filters we have is the church culture filter, right? What is this? What is our church value? Like you have to understand, to pick the right curriculum for you, you have to understand your church. You have to understand your leader, and you have to understand the people that you're leading. So what does our church value most, right? And so that will narrow the field for you. You could be, it depends on what style of church that you're a part of. You could be a very traditional church. You could be a church plant. You could be a charismatic Pentecostal church. You could be a Baptist church, a Presbyterian church. You have to understand the church that you're a part of, because that will definitely narrow the scope for you. Right? A community context filter says this: as a church, who are we trying to reach? Again, this is understanding so this is the kind of church that we are. So it narrows it down a little bit more. So, but who are we trying to reach? And because generally curriculums will help you to know, like this is, so one example is that we use this one curriculum that was when I first started, and it was I think it was more of like an inner city curriculum. It was it was more of an urban context. And so they had this story, and we're more of a suburban type church in the country type church. And so it was a story about this talking about sin. And so it showed this little boy getting a dog, and then it showed a petting the dog. And there was all these different slides that went through, and the dog was just, so it was going through this whole thing about raising this dog. But then all of a sudden the dog turns on the kid and then rips his throat out, and there's blood everywhere. Right. And so for us, that would have been traumatic. For other churches, maybe
traumatic
not.
for me.
I don't know. And so I was talking about how sin, if you coddle it, it will eventually rip your throat out, I think is what they're trying to say. But for us, it was too much. And so we had to make that, and we had to say, and there's a few other things that happened in that curriculum. I'm like, you know what? I don't know if this is geared toward the kind of kids that are coming and who God's placed us with. But it's definitely probably fine for some kids to be like, that's exactly what sin's like. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you have to understand that, I think. A couple other ones was the discipleship filter, right? Is what does a successful disciple look like? And the only way for you to know that is for you to have conversations with your boss or your pastor or your lead team, whoever it is, that's saying, this is what a fully developed follower of Christ looks like in our church. Like, this is what we're trying to produce. And again, that's very specific to there are, obviously there's general things that the Bible says that we're trying to do. But I think in every church that how you go about doing that is very different. And so, so for us, there's certain things like we want all of our kids that go through our kids' church, we want them to be able to recite the 10 Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. And so for us, that's super important, the historic faith handed to us. And so that narrows the field of what curriculums that we can use. So methodology filter, again, is how do you do church? Do you have, are you part of a church where there's a Sunday school before? Are you part of a church where there is like, you have a 1 hour service or a 3 hour service? Like, that's how you do church is going to say, we need, if you're doing 3 hours of church, you need a different curriculum than an hour of content. So what does that look like? In Sunday school, is that the same kids, different kids? Again, you have to ask yourself all those kinds of questions. And the last question you'd have to ask yourself is the gospel question. I think this one is so core, so central, so foundational, is the gospel of Jesus Christ clearly proclaimed week in and week out? This is what Spurgeon said, is we preach Christ and him crucified, right? That isn't just for parents. That isn't just for adults. That is for kids. What do we do? We preach Christ crucified, risen, ascended, interceding for our kids. And so if it doesn't proclaim the gospel with boldness clearly week after week after week, then that is, I would just tell you, that is not a curriculum for you. That is not the curriculum for you. And it's not, the gospel isn't just something that we preach on Easter. It's not just something we communicate once a year. It's a weekly reminding our kids that we have a Savior who lived for us, who modeled for us how life works best, who died in our place, who rose again. And most importantly, and I don't think we talk enough about this in kids ministry, is not only did he rise again, which is amazing, but he ascended to heaven and he is interceding for you. Like, how comforting is that to a kid that Jesus is praying for you? So I think it's important that those are the filters that we use in our church to narrow down to say, this is the best curriculum for us. And usually it's a few, it narrows down. There's like a field of like 30. And for us, generally these filters narrow us down to about 3 or 4.
You have said 2 really important things that I don't want us to miss at this point going forward. The first, Jenny, was what you had mentioned that led Sam into talking about this awesome filter, is what you said. You mentioned, Jenny, that we should not, like, the first thing we do shouldn't be to compare curriculums to each other. And I think that that's really important, because when you're looking at curriculums for your church, while you're looking for a curriculum that's really good, like, you should already have access to curriculums that you should know before they even cross your desk, that they're ones you'll consider for your church. Right? Like, and there's ways you can do that. And so I think recognizing that you're not pitting them against each other, but that you're actually opening up to say, does this fit our church in the context of what we're doing? So then that really widens it out to, Sam, these incredible points you're making, that one, when I look at curriculum, like, okay, I am making sure that it's what my church needs. That's it. All curriculums fit those things in different ways in an amazing ways. God
Right.
has gifted this children's ministry community with a plethora of curriculum
Yeah.
that is so incredible. So I think that's one of the things that I think is so good. Sam, then as you pull through and say, like, how critical is that story about the sin piece, right? Like, if it doesn't connect with your church culture, then it is not going to be something that is going to help your children see themselves the way that God sees them. And what a unique way for us to then change this from the question, am I, like, what is the best children's ministry curriculum, to actually shifting the question that we're asking, which is, which curriculum will help us best disciple the children in our church?
Totally.
And while the nuance there is small in the way that the words are written, I think the impact of that difference in the question is huge.
Right.
And yeah, so Sam, thank you for sharing these with us, because this is something that leads us to then seeing it as more than just, here, let me give my credit card to the right, curriculum provider, to more, man, I can't wait to partner with this organization because they're going to help me to make disciples.
One other thing I would just add too is that curriculum tends to create a conversation. It creates language for your church.
Yep.
So it forms kids, but it also forms the culture of your church because of the way that certain words that are used over and over again. Your volunteers will pick up on that. Your parents will pick up on that, and it sort of becomes this codified language that, and you want to make sure that you're saying the same things in kids' church that are being said in the sanctuary. And so if that language is different, like that's so important that you want to make sure that that you get that right.
There's a question that's come through that kind of just processed about what does it look like to plan, like, what does it look like to plan on a yearly basis curriculum and then change to methodology. And I'd love to dig a little more into the way that you mentioned just a few minutes ago, Sam, that like you should stick to a curriculum for its unless it's just horrible, but like and it's just really not working for your community, but like stick to the cycle to really give it a chance. Like, why is it important for us to do the research and stick to a curriculum and let it flesh itself out in our ministries versus changing on a yearly basis and just shifting back and forth?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say is, again, it's like, I think that you have to, like, every curriculum, like I said before, has like a rough week here and there. And when we base it solely on that, or we go to a conference and we see one booth has lots of people there, or you talk to people and you say everyone's using a particular curriculum, I feel like you're missing out on something. And I think, again, when you change it, like you said, Melanie, I think so brilliantly, is that there is not any best curriculum. It's which one is best for the church in the place where God's planted you. And when you put down your roots and you say, you know what, we're gonna work through this together, right? And when you put it through these filters that we're talking about, what you're gonna have is a curriculum that is pretty close to what's best for your church. And you work through it and you partner with that organization to be able to work with your families, to be able to, to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve through the curriculum that you're using. And so it's just so important, I think, that you don't just hop from one to the other, because what happens is that what you're doing is you're giving your kids whiplash. It's like, we're doing this, then we're doing this, and then there's a whole different way of doing it. And without allowing it to really first of all, put all your work on the front end and figure out, what is the methodology? How does this work? What are they trying to accomplish, the people that have written this, and what are their goals? And most curriculum publishing companies now are super accessible. The people they're super accessible through social media. Reach out to them, shoot an email, set up a Zoom call, to say, like, I want to get it right on the front end, so we're not giving our kids whiplash.
And I would add to that, I mean, when you think about the years that we have a kid in kids ministry, it's really not very long. It seems like a long time when they're in kindergarten, but they are going into student ministry before we know it. And think, if we're changing what we're doing every year, every 2 years, we're giving those kids whiplash. Like, are we really laying a firm discipleship foundation for them if we're constantly turning over what we're doing, if, every year they're going to learn the exact same story because it's in every different curriculum that we do, right?
No, totally,
So
yeah.
I love what you're saying about stick out with that scope and sequence, because what kind of foundation you're laying for those kids, and it's not all over the place. I think we've got to lead more from a long-term perspective than we tend to do in kids ministry.
Yeah.
I think we tend to, because Sunday's always coming, we tend to go from school year to school year or week to week. And I think for the discipleship of our kids, we've got to look bigger picture and look longer term than that.
No, Jenny, that's so good. I think that's what we do, is we neglect long-term formation for short-term affirmation. Right. We want parents to say, wow, this is great. My kids enjoyed it. They had fun. This is a great curriculum. We want that, sometimes at the expense of the formation of kids, that sometimes and that's the challenge of kids ministry, right? Is that the seed is in the ground, and sometimes we sow and we water and we plant, right? And it's years before that seed even breaks through the ground. And what we have to do in kids ministry is understand that God gives the increase, not me. My job is to be faithful, to proclaim Christ in a way that Scripture does, and to proclaim all of Scripture. Like, to me, all of Scripture is important for kids to hear. That is what Timothy tells us. It doesn't just say just for kids. Only kids need to get these stories, the stories with animals in it, right? That's the only stories that kids need. Kids need all of Scripture. They need to hear all of it, because it is for their good and God's glory. Because when we simplify, right, what we do is we truncate the gospel. We make it seem smaller. But when we leave room for wonder and for grace and for the power of Jesus Christ at work in their life, what happens is it opens their eyes to see the beauty of Jesus that is so much bigger than any situation. So when they get into situations down the road, which they will, that are difficult and filled with sorrow and hardship, their faith is big enough to hold them. Because we haven't so simplified the story of who Jesus is, that they let go of that they have a faith that is weak and ineffective when the storms of life come.
I want to dig into this for just another second. Let's just sit here for a second, specifically within the realm of methodology. All right. So we've talked about like this is all. It's important for us to look at curriculum for the long-term goals. Jenny, what a beautiful point that is. Yes, let's stop looking at what serves us in the now. I heard somebody say something again the other day that said, don't sacrifice what you want in the end for what you can get now. Let me say that right. Don't sacrifice what you'll receive in the end just to get the gratification of the now. Right. And sometimes the gratification of the now is the check. It's done. Sunday is covered.
Right.
But long term, we're looking at, does this child know, love, and serve Jesus with all of their heart, right? So let's dig into the methodology, because I think this methodology frame can kind of go two directions. The first theme is what you meant it as, which is the methodology of your church. And it's the very practical. Do the children in your church go into their classroom for the entire service? Or are they like my church, where you drop them off and then halfway through the service, you actually pick them up during the greeting where people say hey to each other, and then they sit with you as a family and you worship together as a family for the rest, right? Like, that's kind of the methodology we're talking about. You're talking about, how does your church function on a practical level? But then there's the methodology of what is often pushing us in the curriculum world of, this is what's new, and this is what's bright, and this is what's flashy. And sometimes that can make us feel pushed to change. And so how do we balance that? How do we balance that difference of methodology and really feel like, is there a time where we need to change because what we're currently doing doesn't fit what kids are attracted to, and not sticking in the actual curriculum and letting it go?
I think there's a great balance in what you're saying, Melanie, because I think we can have the best gospel-centered, biblically deep content, but if we're not teaching it in a way that is appropriate for kids, or that they will learn by, because kids are different than grown-ups. Well, I can't sit and listen to a lecture for 30 minutes either. But here's what I'm trying to say. If we have this amazing content and we are just trying to present it to kids in a way that's not kid friendly and not kid appropriate, that's not a great curriculum and that's not a great fit for us, right? For any kid. So I think it is important to find what I think you're saying, Melanie, is to find something that has that content we're looking for, but the methodology has to fit what the kids in our context need as well. Yeah. Some contexts, kids we have a lot of private school kids and homeschool kids in our church. They can do a little more sit and listen, right? There are other contexts that you've got to have them moving and busy and hands-on the whole entire time, or they're not going to hear anything you say. Yeah. But it's got to be balanced with the content. It's not, okay, we're going to be busy and play games and maybe learn a little bit. Yeah. You've got to figure out how to incorporate both of those together. I don't know if that made sense. Sam, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I guess I'd say just practically on that, like whenever I'm looking at curriculum, I look at, am I going to have to tweak the small groups or am I going to have to tweak the large group? Mm-hmm. Like the Bible story, right? Mm-hmm. And so for us, maybe that's just my particular bent or our particular church. I would rather tweak the Bible story than to try to change all the small groups. So if the small groups fit the methodology of our church, I go with that curriculum. Because for us, it's a lot easier just to change one thing, like tweak the Bible story just a tad or add something to it, maybe some language that we typically use. So much more simple than to try to come up with alternate, like what you're saying is come up with, like, let's say it's more of a sit and do curriculum. I'm gonna have to spend hours trying to come up with go and be activities for these kids. And so what you want to do is find a small group option that's go and be, and then if the large group isn't as much as what you want, then tweak that. So you have to really ask yourself, like, what am I going to tweak, and how much time is that going to take, and how's the Lord uniquely gifted me? Because for some people, for me, the large group is crazy easy. For some people, they might say that's hard for me, but I'm great with small groups. And so again, that's just your church. But for us, the way that God's gifted me and our team, we make the decision we don't want to tweak small groups. Because it's so much more work for us. But everybody.
I guess I would want to jump in and say, as you and I both have been in kids ministry for a million years. Melanie, you've done kids ministry. Like, sometimes it's overwhelming to hear. I still go back to that temptation of, I just want something that's easy that I get in my hand and pass out on Sunday morning. So I just want to reiterate again that it's worth the work. So this is so essential, because this is one of the core components of discipling the kids in your church. This is what's worth the work, more than figuring out the check-in systems, more than getting cool things on the wall. This is so worth it. And so I just want to throw that out there, because I know it can be overwhelming for the kids leaders that are living and breathing it day in and day out.
Yeah, totally, Jenny. I think, and again, like, I don't ascribe to you take care of the kids, we'll take care of the content. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think you have to be, like you're saying, you have to be intentional in that, in picking it, and then in crafting it, and even helping your leaders. To say, I'll have conversations with the people telling our Bible story. Say, here's where we're trying to get to, right? Here's what the end result is of what we're trying to look to. Here's where we want to move the kids toward. Here's how we want them to see Jesus this week. And to say, in your own words, get them to this place where they see and they are moved to worship, where they see Jesus as beautiful, as they see Jesus as powerful, as lovely, as good, as great. And we want to exalt Christ in everything that we do. And it's so important that we don't subcontract out everything, and so we can do other things. That we have to be involved to a certain level. And to me, I look at curriculum as a huge help that's already created, and as a huge help, and as that does like the heavy lifting. But you have to lift some. Right? No matter how small your church is, you have to have your fingerprint on that, because it matters so much, because it paints a picture to kids of who Jesus is. And so we can't just leave that. We have to make sure that we have our fingers on that pulse.
And in that vein, Sam, too, with like Jenny just stated so well, like it is worth the work. So if you're finding yourself sitting at a place where you're asking yourself, is this worth it? lean into that for a second, because perhaps you're not actually needing to change your curriculum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if for some reason you're finding that the methodology of culture is telling you that you need to switch curriculums because you don't have enough digital assets to it, make sure that that actually jives with what Sam is saying, with the methodology and structure of your own church and how you function. If your church isn't necessarily super high tech driven, then having to adapt to a methodology that is all of a sudden creates a clash in cultures in an area where it is most critical, right? So I think to kind of put just a bow on all of the amazing things you guys are saying, like again, the methodology of your church and the methodology of the specific curriculum needs to match.
Yeah,
and
totally.
You have to be willing to, like you're saying, Sam, you have to be willing to make the changes, because everything will need to be tweaked. And if you're not, then it might be you need to look at a different one. And so I'd love to just jump in here to the next space of, like, we know that you have curriculums out there that you have been using, and over the last couple of years, God's really challenged the team at Awana to say, what would it look like for us to be able to help make resilient disciples who do love and follow after Jesus for their life? And we've brought forth these questions around, how do we help the children who are disciples in our churches today, the children who are sitting at our preschool tables, the children who are in our worship centers, how do we make them the leaders of the church of 2050? And so as we've begun to ask these questions, we've seen a couple of things come to light. One of them is the framework I mentioned before, which is the 3Bs, what it looks like to equip a church to help a child belong in their community, a highly relational, get down on one knee, look them in the eye, let them know that this, out of any place on earth, is where you are meant to be, right here in this church, in relationship with a healthy, loving, caring adult. And then next is helping them to know that they need to believe that's this gospel lens, Sam, that you're talking about. Like, what does it look like for the transformational work of God to be present in the life of this child through scripture? And then what does that look like on an ongoing basis to become more like him and to pattern their lives to love and thirst and serve him, and then continue doing that in the people around them? And so to bring this into a conversation around Bright, I'd love to hear, Bright Bright is the curriculum that Awana has made for weekends. And so Awana has been a long-lasting organization who has served the church through midweek curriculum. And Bright is now the curriculum that is for our weekends. For those of you who are like, I need something on Sundays or Saturday nights, that's what Bright is. So Kelly, help us know, like, I'm sorry, Kelly, Jenny,
sorry.
Kelly is another friend of ours. She works at Awana in the curriculum team. My apologies. Jenny, would you help us to be able to, like, why is Bright something that helps meet these core needs in the life of a child in their discipleship journey?
Well, first, I don't mind being mistaken for Kelly. That's quite the compliment, isn't she? But Bright is something that I have become very passionate about. I came on staff at Awana in January, primarily for the reason of this vision that Awana has developed for child discipleship. And I've always been passionate about curriculum. I've always been passionate about discipling kids. And seeing what God was doing in Bright was honestly one of the big reasons that I switched careers. And so I am passionate about it, and I am a little bit biased, but I do want to share with you guys how Bright fits into the things that we've been talking about. So what it looks like is, through a year, we go through the whole story of scripture. We go from Genesis to Revelation every single year, different stories each year on a 3-year cycle. But each year, kids are exposed to that whole big story of the Bible. Each week, they learn a bright idea that's focused on who God is. So each week, that bright idea is reinforced to them through everything that we do. We have 2 big questions that we ask kids every week: a he question about God, and then an us question, a we question about who we are and how we respond to God. So we're really digging into the depth of the Bible and that belief portion of really helping them understand who God is, what Jesus has done for them, and then the belong, how it impacts their life. One of the things I love about Bright is every single week we're talking about a tough topic, is how we talk about it. in our team. Navigating a Broken World is what it's called in the curriculum, where, this week we're talking about joy. We're also going to talk a little bit about depression, because we know that the numbers of kids struggling with that is skyrocketing.
Yeah.
We're talking about something about God is in control of everything. We're also going to talk a little bit about anxiety and if I'm dealing with anxious thoughts, how do I deal with that in light of God is in control of everything? And so it's one of the things that I love about Bright is that we are taking deep truth for kids and putting it into their world. With the gospel, every single week, we're pointing to Jesus, whatever story, whatever portion of the Bible we're in, we're pointing to Jesus and what the gospel has to do with what we're talking about. And then we're doing it in fun, engaging ways, right? We talked about methodology a little bit ago, that we are doing hands-on interactive learning with the kids. We have video components and all those things that aren't the most important, but are important as far as engaging kids and helping make disciples. And so those are kind of the big rocks, but the biggest point is what you made, Melanie, is just that philosophy of belong, helping kids be in a community. Y'all, last night I was hanging out with some big kids and I was subbing in a group, and they're doing prayer requests or something, and a little girl says something about Disney World, and another kid says, hope you don't get dehydrated. And they all start giggling and cackling. I was like, what in the world is happening right now? I don't know what's happening. It was some inside joke that they had, some former story, because they had built community together.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, this is belonging. This is what we are going for. Because in that community, then their next conversation was believe kind of conversation, was, okay, what does this verse mean? And how do we apply that to our lives? And then become, that we're not just leaving it at head knowledge. We believe at Bright very strongly that we've got to help these kids become like Jesus and live it out in their world. And so, Mel, I appreciate you giving me the chance to share that, because I feel like Bright is really filling a good spot in this curriculum space in kids and world.
Yeah, so if you are watching this and you haven't ever checked out Bright, would you just do yourself a favor and check out brightcurriculum.com? We would love for you to you can get a free download sample of 4 weeks of what does this actually look like, so that then you can take Sam's ebook and you can really take your own, each of those kind of pillars of what filter am I going to, what filters do I put this through? And you can determine, like, does this fit for our church? So as we wrap this up, I would love to just do one little last question that's kind of like just let's get real. All right. And I'd love to hear from both of you, Jenny and Sam, like, let's get real around what mistakes have you made as children's ministry leaders choosing curriculum, and what mistakes do just we in general as leaders make? Like, let's get real and actually get super practical here as we close out our conversation.
I think I would say on two different extremes. So one would be sticking with something longer than I should. So Sam did talk earlier about don't give up too soon. But I think there have been seasons where I stuck with something longer than was effective for our church, because it was easy, because I knew it, we knew it, my church knew it, my volunteers knew it. So I wasn't quite ready to make a switch, because I didn't want to do the work. To be honest, I didn't want to do the work to be involved with it. So I think that's one extreme. Another extreme is I've always defaulted to writing curriculum for our church. And that ended up taking hours and hours and hours when maybe it wasn't the best option. And so it can be, there have been seasons and opportunities where it has been the best solution. But sometimes it just wasn't. Sometimes it was me just wanting to have my hands on it more than it wasn't the best stewardship of my time.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than using something that was prepared and tweaking it, like Sam said. Sam never makes mistakes, so I'm not sure he has an answer.
No. I agree. I mean, I actually was going to say that exact same thing. I think staying with something longer than you should is definitely worth the mention. You know what I'm saying? Because I think as a pastor, right, part of your job as a kids ministry leader, as a kids pastor, is to know the heart of your church, to know what your kids need, and to make sure that you go find that. And I think if you stick with it too long, sometimes you do that just because it's easier. This is what we've always done. We're sort of in the groove of this, and you have posters that you're excited to reuse that you bought 4 years ago, and even the church money, which is important. It's something to think about. But again, you have to say, like, what is God? What is best for the kids that God is interested in my care, and how can I best serve them and the families that are a part? I think the mistake again is that we make is thinking that is over focused. I think hyper focus on digital, I think can be a mistake. I think digital is super helpful, but a friend of mine said that what God blesses, he said this, what God blesses as a supplement, he curses as a substitute. And I think in some ways, like with the Bible story, with like what we use our Bible stories for as a supplement to our Bible storytellers, which are real people that are really in the community, that the kids can go up to and have a conversation with, that their lives are being modeled for them, that they're not hearing some information from a person they don't know. So what we always use as every Bible story, and we use almost every week, we use the digital Bible story, but not as a substitute. We use it as a supplement. And so I think that's a big mistake, is that when we outsource the authority of scripture to a person the kids don't know, it can kind of sort of become like this, it can become a story and not a truth that is foundational, and that they can watch week in and week out lived out. So I think that's a mistake that we made, was that when digital first came out, we went all digital, and I think it wasn't what was best for our kids in our particular context.
I would add one of my own. I think you mentioned it earlier, which is a mistake that can be made in curriculum is thinking that you are just going to be able to find the perfect one, that then once you're done, you check it off and then you go on to something else. And I think a key part of the curriculum is that actually you should be kind of checking in with your leaders, with your volunteers, with everyone on a consistent basis, not like a yearly basis, on like maybe a quarterly basis, to say like, hey, how's this working? How is this impacting the kids? Because again, we're not looking at the filter of, does the curriculum make our life easier? Which it's a benefit, but it is not the key thing. We're asking, is this helping our church to make disciples? And that, like, filtering it through there. And it's easy to lose that. And again, like you said, Jenny, let a curriculum stay too long because you've just kind of washed your hands of it because you already went through that process.
I'd add probably one more. I would say don't make the decision in a vacuum. Because you went to a conference and they had a great booth, or someone else, but don't just do that. What I would do is, what I typically do whenever we're going to change curriculums, is I find 3 or 4 that fit within the framework of what would work in our church, and I give them out. I get most curriculum companies, like Bright does, is they'll give you samples. Download the samples. And then give them to key stakeholders, to teachers, to kids ministry leaders, other people at other campuses, parents, and to say, what do you think of this? Which one of these 3 options do you think best fits the framework of our church, and would you feel like would most connect with the people that God's called us to serve? So don't make the decision to which curriculum you're going to use by yourself. Involve the people that it's going to be affecting directly. And so that's another one I would probably say.
All right, we're going to go into a lightning round really quick. Some leaders have their leadership already with them, and they have that. They're not making decisions in a vacuum. They're able to throw this to not only their volunteers, but also their children's ministry leadership, in addition to church leadership. And it just is a beautiful, it's a beautiful world. But that's not true for all leaders. How do you choose a curriculum and make sure that you are not making it in a vacuum, but also work to making sure that curriculum fits in with leadership? Tell me one thing that you would encourage someone to do today to help bring church leadership into this decision-making process.
You didn't say it was going to be a hard lightning round question. Are you asking church leadership, like the pastors, the people above?
Above? You can just define that, like whether that's like the pastoral leadership, but like what's one thing you'd encourage them to do to help open that up and bring the children's ministry into the broader vision of church discipleship?
I think I'll give Sam a second to think. If that was not a typical conversation, just ask pastor or whatever senior leader might respond. hey, tell me 3 things that you think are important for kids to know before they're headed into student ministry. And maybe ask that as a student minister as well, if you have one at your church or whoever's heavily involved in that area. It's, hey, what are 3 things that are important to you? Because they may not be ready for a whole long sit down evaluation and conversation, but they can tell you 3 things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I think quickly is just finding out for your senior pastor again what they like Jenny's saying, what they value.
Yeah.
Right. But making sure that you're clear on that, and then I would involve them, say, hey, here's a couple of options. Here's sort of here's a like what they do, and here's a couple of things. Give them some input on it as well, because a lot of senior pastors are nervous because they feel like you're the kid's expert, I'm not, but they really are ultimately responsible. They're, for the discipleship of the church. And it's important that they're aware of what's happening. And that I know that there's some churches where the pastor is totally uninvolved and totally disinterested in the thing. He's saying, you just do what you do and I'll do what I do. And I think in a lot of cases that I think it's our job to involve them actively, to say, hey, what do you think of this lesson? I was going through it, and how would you present this if you're going to preach on Sunday? What do you want people to take away from this? And so you just ask them questions here and there to pepper them, to say, like, what do you want, and to what are you looking for, and then move that direction. So it gives them a confidence of knowing that you're not just out there teaching whatever. That they know that it's what's being taught matches what they're desiring for it to be.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. We've had another question. You guys have no idea that you were going to get these peppered at you. Another question.
Sounds great at it.
You guys are doing awesome. So keep it up. How do you get buy-in from a team that just really says, I just want plug and play? Like, so I would guess that some context around that might be too, like, how do you cast vision to help a team know that this is discipleship? And when really what they're yearning for is simplicity, that easy check mark, that plug and play idea.
I think that is a great question, and such a real life question too, April. Thank you for asking that. It goes a lot with what Melanie was saying, is casting the vision. So one thing that I've done before, as we were looking at making a change, and we were actually making a change that I knew some people were really dug into what we had been doing, but we could see we weren't discipling kids. So we gathered our whole team together and we kind of did a brainstorming session. Rather than me saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and why, we started with, what are we trying to accomplish? And we, had big pieces of paper where we're writing it down. And everybody on your team is going to say they want kids to love Jesus. I hope. If not, they may need to go serve in the coffee or the parking lot or something like that. But, get them started on that big picture. And then next step would be, what does it really take for kids to do that? And they're probably not going to mention video, right? They're probably not going to mention whatever you think of when you think of plug and play. They're probably going to talk about they need to know the Bible, they need relationships, that kind of thing. And then kind of transition from there of, okay, what does our curriculum need to look like? Videos are great, but how can we supplement that? How can we incorporate these things that you guys said were needed? Does that make sense? Kind of walk them through the whole beginning of the process, from what do we want and how do we get there. That has worked with us as far as making some big changes and helping people really be bought in from the beginning.
No, I think it's good. I think you do also need to, I think it being accessible and plug and play is not wrong. You know what I'm saying? Making it easy for the volunteer, taking the weight off the volunteer isn't wrong. But again, if it's that isn't the primary consideration. So I think you need to take that into consideration, is how hard will this be? What will this demand? And I think you have to be upfront with the volunteers to say, hey, so I usually tell the volunteers to say, hey, here's what I need from you is, we're going to do everything we can do to have everything ready for you. Everything will be prepped. Everything will be all set. What we need from you is to connect with God and to say, God, what do you have? Just pray for your kids. Say, God, what give me, I pray that we'll have like some God moments this weekend, that you'll direct me to the right kids and have the right thing to say to those kids who are struggling. Right. But then also just look over the lesson, take like 20 minutes and just look over it and pray over it and say, God, help me to not only just communicate information, but to also share my life. Right. And that's what Paul says. I love how he says, we have many teachers, but not many fathers. And so what we want our volunteers to be is not just a teacher, but we want them to be a father and a mother to these kids. And what that is the way that happens is by you sharing your life. That's by you taking the information that is there and then adding your life to it, so that the kids not only just hear good facts about God, but they see Jesus in you.
Yeah.
I love that. Sorry, Mel.
Please go.
I love that you emphasize that we can't make it hard on volunteers, right? Like, discipleship is our key important part. That doesn't mean it has to be super stressful and hard on our volunteers, because they don't do this for a living. They do have a whole life going on Monday to Saturday or whatever. So thank you, Sam, for bringing that up, is that as we do this, as we figure it out, well, we don't want plug and play just to be our default because it's easy. At the same time, we don't want to make it so hard that our volunteers can't even show up and
Right.
can't disciple because they're having to do whatever. So
yeah, you're making an interesting point too, that to kind of dig into the, like, what do they need to be easy? Because often the first couple of things that they start coming off with are going to get at the heart of what they might be feeling inadequate around, or what they might be feeling burnt out about.
Totally.
And so I think as you ask the question around, like, what needs to be easier, then it also leads to what Sam was talking about, which is that the discipleship is your main goal through your relationship with Jesus. The curriculum is, again, the supplement, not the substitute. And that is, I think, the perfect way to end. So Sam, thank you so much for giving us so much wisdom today. Jenny, thank you so much for making this so practical and helping us understand through a new lens. These filters are great. And we will talk to you guys all next time. Thanks for your time.
thank you.